Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Nun Tes in Sanhedrin, as we learn for the Aliyas Neshama, the yard site today of Fega Bas Yosef, Rumi's mother-in-law. It's 12 years, and we also learn, of course, for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and Asunim Batzar V'Shivya. We'll start from the second line on Daf Nun Tes where we left off. Amar B'Yochanan, Daf Nun Tes Amar Alf. Amar B'Yochanan, Avikam Shasik B'Torah, a guy who studies Torah. I will see what I mean by Torah. Chai Mises Shneimar Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe Kilas Yaakov. Pasuk says that Hashem Moshe taught us, commanded us the Moshe via Hashem via Moshe taught us the Torah. He commanded us to keep it. Morasha Kilas Yaakov. It's an inheritance. Lanu Morasha V'Lohem. It's ours, not theirs. So if they study Torah, remember the punishment for the Zayin Mitzvahs B'nai Noach or other ones, as we said added on, the punishment for them is always death via hereg, via sword, via decapitation. So if they keep our Torah, they've stolen, as we see. I'm sure it's ours, not theirs. So the Gemara says, why don't we count this among the 7 mitzvahs B'nai Noach? One of them is that he should learn Torah. So the reason is, why not? The one who learns Morasha as Morasha literally, it's an inheritance ours. Megzol Kugosel, they're stealing. We already know stealing is one of the Zayin mitzvahs by Noach. So the Chayv that if you learn, again, some learn that when it says Torah Sivlan and Moshe, Morasha Kilasek is really a lotion of the Shin and the Samach, as many times are exchangeable, and therefore it's like Morasha. It's like Morasha Kilasek. It's like we're betrothed, the Torah is betrothed to us, then Dina Kana Marasa. Then his judgment is also like a Marasa the Beskila. So either way, he is already covered. He's already covered by either because of Gezel, one of Zayin, or because of adultery. In this corner of adultery, as we learned before, is if it's not covered, since there's no Nar Marasa by Goyim don't have a rule of Morasa. There's no such thing as an engagement or a betrothal. So if they committed adultery on a Jewish girl who's Morasa, then they're killed the skila, as we learned before. So therefore, the reason wasn't mentioned among the Zayin mitzvahs Meinoch is because it's already covered either by adultery or by Gezel. Meisvei. You just said that if a guy studies Torah, he's chayav misa. How do we know? Here we have a Bryce from Meir says, how do we know that if a guy studies Torah, Kohen Gadol, he's like a Kohen Gadol? In other words, he's a great person if he studies Torah. Shnemar Asher Yasa Asher Yasa Osam Ha'adam Chaybem, that a person does these things, studies Torah, and he'll live by them. It doesn't say whether Kohanim Levim Yisrael, the 3 types of Jews, will live by them, but rather El Ha'adam. And according to this plot, Adam means all people, all human beings, right? There's a machlokas elsewhere. We had Rashi brings down the machlokas in Yevamos. To Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon says that Darshan's ha'adam, atem adam, kori adam v'lo goyim. But Rav Meir doesn't hold it. That says atem kori adam v'lo avik. He holds adam refers to all mankind. So according to this, it doesn't say mankind should study Torah or Yisrael and Kohanim Yisrael should Torah. It says if all mankind keeps the Torah, studies the Torah. So how can you say that if a guy keeps Torah, he's chayiv misa? Here it's mashma if a guy keeps Torah, it's a good thing. He's commended for it. It says halamanat shafil of gechav masik Torah kohen gadol. Doesn't say kohen levim Yisraelim. It says adam. Any human person who studies Torah is as great as a kohen gadol. The answer is hasam b'sheva mitzvahs too. When we say that even goyim who study Torah are considered like a Kohen Gadol, it's if they're occupied with the Zayin mitzvahs that they have to keep. And as we said, the Zayin mitzvahs is not dafka Zayin. It's really, some say, as we said, they add on even more. For example, like we're going to have Rabbi Chanina says even dam, not just Avram Menachai, but even dam Menachai, and others add on what Sirus and other things are added on, and certainly how it affects how there are the rules of adultery and the rules of Avodah all those things, and they have to study those things. It's not a simple thing like quoting Zayin Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. They have to occupy themselves understanding all the details and what are their responsibilities. The Mishnah, the Rav Chanina ben Gamliel added on, not only is Aver Menachai, right? Not only is Aver Menachai, not only is the Zayin Mitzvahs included Menachai, but when we listed the Zayin Mitzvah Noach, Rav Chanina added on even Dam Menachai, blood of a lifetime. Tarabonim. Ach basar benafsho dama lo sochel. Basar benafsho, benafsho dama lo sochelu. What does this refer to? You should not eat the meat or the flesh of an animal while it's still alive. Benafsho dama when it's alive and has its blood. Zever menachai. Okay, Ever menachai is also okay. Ach basar benafsho. That's the command that Hashem commanded Bnei Noach. Don't eat Ever menachai. Not only Aver if you're eating the meat, the flesh of the animal, even blood of a live animal that you extract from is also. So my time, what's his reasoning? Kori Bay Basar benafsho lo sochel, Dama benafsho lo sochel. Because it could just say Ach Basar benafsho. Why does it say Dama? It just don't eat Basar while the animal's alive. In other words, don't hack off a piece of meat of a live animal, or if you hacked it off or it just fell off or whatever it was. You cannot eat the meat of an animal while it's alive. Why did it say damo? It's teaching you not only basar benafsho sochel, but dama benafsho. You can't eat any blood while the animal's alive also. If you took it off while the animal's alive, even if the animal subsequently died, but you detached it, became detached while it was alive, that's also also. So Reb Chanina ben Gamliel adds on that there's an eighth mitzvah b'nei Noach, not Sheb mitzvah Noach, but there's an eighth one. Rabbanim, what are the Rabbanim who say there's only Zion? What do they do with that? So that's to tell me that shrutzim, creeping things that they don't really, their blood is not separate. In other words, animals, mammals, let's call them human beings and mammals, their blood is separate from the flesh. It's you have flesh and you have blood inside. The liquid comes out. Here, when it comes to shrutzim, their blood and their flesh are indiscernible. They're totally mixed up. So it's not separate bombs. It's dam and afsho. The mesher shrutzim huda atza. In other words, to tell you that certain shrutzim are mutter to be eaten because they don't have blood. Their blood is not separate from their flesh. Similarly, we find by Jews. In other words, Rav Meir who says that dam is also dam menachai is also. Dam menachai is also for, not only was that a mitzvah b'nei Noach, but it's also for Jews, as it says later on, as we'll see. Any mitzvahs that was repeated at Sinai is for both Jews and non-Jews, for b'nei Noach as well. And Rashi says over here, holds that dam from a live person, from a live being, is prohibited. Just like that's part of the Zion mitzvah Noach. For Rabbanan, what do the Rabbanan do with that drasha? The Rabbanan who say anyway, dam menachai is not osir, it's not one of Zion mitzvah Noach. What do they do with that? With that pasuk of rak chazak levilti adam ki adam u'nefesh, is to tell you that if you let blood, so if blood went to a bloodletter, and whether it's an animal or a human being. It's not only the dam shchita. Let's say you might have thought that what dam is osir, when you shecht an animal, the blood that spurts out immediately, that's osir. But maybe the dam that drains out of the animal, because it drains out of the animal, maybe that's not osir. No, if that's the lifeblood of the animal, and as if that blood is the blood from which when that blood drains out, the life of the animal is gone, that's also osir. Now the Gemara goes into the question: why did the pasuk have to say in Isser b'nei Noach? Why was it repeated at Sinai? As we find many mitzvahs like avodah zarah, adultery, things like that, it was not only told to b'nei Noach, but it was also repeated at Sinai. Why? Famous Rosh any mitzvah that was told to b'nei Noach, v'nishnas b'Sinai, and is repeated at Sinai. That means it was meant both for Goyim and for Jews. Although some details changed, some details are different between Jews and Goyim, but the general idea is that if a mitzvah was told to Bnei Noach and then was repeated at Sinai, it's for both Jews and non-Jews. Right. Let's say now here's what seems strange. If it was only told to Bnei Noach and wasn't repeated at Sinai, so you would think that's only for non-Jews and not for Jews. No. Just the opposite. The Yisrael number of Noach, that means it was only for the Jews and not for Bnei Noach. Not for Bnei Noach. Well, does that make sense? It was told to Bnei Noach and it wasn't repeated at Sinai, so you might think it's not for the Jews. There's no, accept it this way. We'll explain why momentarily. V'anu ein lanu, is there any mitzvah like that was told to Bnei Noach and was not repeated at Sinai? For example, Shabbos was not given to Bnei Noach. Just the opposite. They're not allowed to keep Shabbos, as we learned yesterday, right? It's also for them to keep Shabbos. So there was no Isser, there was no mitzvah of Shabbos there, it was told to Jews. Many mitzvahs are only told to Jews. All the Beis Hamikdash rules, all the Kedusha, Karbanos, things like that, was only told to Jews. But if it was a mitzvah that was told to Bnei Noach and to Jews, and at Har Sinai, then it's for both. If it was only told to Bnei Noach and not repeated at Har Sinai, then it's only for the Jews, even though it doesn't seem right. But there's only one example. The only mitzvah that was told to Bnei Noach and was not repeated at Har Sinai was Gid Anasha. According to Rabbi Yehuda, who learns that it was actually told to Bnei Yaakov, was told it before Har Sinai. Some learn that there's a machlokas there. The mitzvah of Gid Anasha, what does it say? It says in Bereshit, Al Kain Lo Yochol, right? Bnei Yisrael Gid Anasha. Was it really said over there? Was it really told to Bnei Yaakov at that point? Or it was only told at Sinai, but when the Torah was written by Hashem and given to Moshe, they stuck it in Bereshit to tell you the mitzvah that was given at Har Sinai, Gid Anasha, was because of what took place there with the Yaakov and the angel. That's what it was. So according to Rabbi Yehuda says no, it was actually told to Bnei Yaakov at that point. Rashi points out in the fifth, sixth of the wide lines near the bottom. So the only example of a mitzvah that was told to Bnei Noach and not repeated at Sinai was Gid Anasha, and therefore it only applies to the Jews. I'll leave it to Yehuda. Amar Mar. Now let's analyze that. Does it make sense?
Bris Milah also?
Oh, we're going to talk about Bris Milah. Bris Milah, good kasha. The Gemara is going to ask that kasha. That's more kasha. I always say my third corollary of learning the Daf is if you understand the Gemara, you'll ask Tosas kasha. But if you ask the Gemara's kasha, that's even better. The Gemara is going to ask that. Okay, so as we said, we had Zion Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, just like we're going to read tomorrow the Aseres Adibros, right? It's not really 7, it's not really 10 mitzvahs, there's more than 10 mitzvahs. It's called Aseres Adibros, the 10 commandments, but there's more than 10 mitzvahs there. By Shiur Mitzvah Bnei Noach, yes, basically there are 7, but we have different opinions, as we just said. Dam Merachai, we had Sirus, we had other mitzvahs, and we're going to ask about questions like Bris. We're going to come to that. But let's first analyze this idea of Rebbe Yosef Chanina, that if it was said before Sinai and repeated at Sinai, then it's for both Goyim and Jews. If it was said before Matan Torah and then not repeated at Sinai, then it's only for Jews. And what's there's only one example, Gid Anasha. If it was repeated, it's for both. Since it was repeated at Sinai, it was only for the Jews. In other words, before Matan Torah, maybe it was for Bnei Noach. Now that the Torah was given at Har Sinai, and it was repeated at Har Sinai, that Torah was only given to the Jews, as we said. Torah tzivul on Moshe, Morosh Akiv for the Jews. The answer is no. Midas nevekachavim b'Sinai. Avodah Zarah was already told to Bnei Noach. So why was it repeated at Har Sinai? Why was it repeated again? Not only that, we find that after Matan Torah, the Goyim are also punished for Avodah Zarah. As it says, Hashem said, because the Goyim did all these abominable things, these Torah Selah, Hashem kicked them out of Eretz Yisrael. So they had to keep the mitzvah of Avodas Kachavim, and they were punished for it. So obviously, it was given to the Goyim. Even though it was repeated at Har Sinai, it was repeated at Sinai, and it was applying to the Goyim too. So you see that a mitzvah that was given before Matan Torah and then was repeated at Sinai still applies to the Goyim. Shema Mino Zel Zeh Nemer. So you see that a mitzvah was given to Bnei Noach and was repeated at Sinai, like Avodas Kachavim, and we'll see adultery also. And it applies to the Goyim afterwards. So it shows you that it applies to both. Let's say it was only given to Bnei Noach and not repeated at Har Sinai. So then Yisrael Nemer V'lo Bnei Noach. So Gemara, what kind of sense does that make? Adarabba. Since it wasn't repeated at Sinai, Hashem gave us all the Torah at Har Sinai, right? Or at least started to give us the Torah at Har Sinai. So if it wasn't repeated at Har Sinai, l'chora, then how could you say it applies to Jews? Maybe it was only to Bnei Noach and not to Jews. Maybe the Goyim have an Isser and not Jews. Says the Gemara, a famous line, we had it before. Leka midim, there is no such thing to Yisrael, shori love kachav maser. Not talking about mitzvahs like a mitzvah of Shabbos or a mitzvah of Pidyon Aben or something like that. A mitzvah is given to him. But there's nothing which is mutter for a Jew to do and it is also for a Goy. There's no such thing as Goyim have an Isser and we don't have such an Isser. If Goyim have an Isser, we certainly have an Isser. Why? Because when we were given the Torah, we were made more holy. So we're not going from a stage of where, we were very holy when we were Goyim, when we were all Bnei Noach, And now that we became a Jew, well, we got a free pass. No such thing. If it's also for Goyim, it's certainly also for Jews. So you can't say that if it's something that wasn't repeated at Har Sinai, then it only remains also for Goyim, not for Jews. And it's not also for Jews since Goyim can't be. So therefore, if it was given to Bnei Noach and not given to the Jews, not said at Har Sinai, it must be that it's only for the Jews. Think more below. What do you mean? There's no such thing as something which is also for Goyim and what the Jews have a fast Torah. The Jews have a special mitzvah that if you go to war and you come across a fast Torah, the whole procedure you have to do, how to take her into the house, and she's first a shiksa, and if you're going to keep, you have to megayer her, etc., etc. You only have to have beer with her once before she's megayer. All these different rules were fast Torah. The Goyim don't have that ability. For them, adultery is adultery. That's not because they have an Isser and we have a Heter. It's simply because we have a rule of Kiddush where we have an allowance, or we have the ability of the mitzvah to conquer Eretz Yisrael and lands around it. We have they don't have such a mitzvah. Now, since they don't have a Kiddush, they're not capable of conquering. Not physically capable, but they don't have a mitzvah to conquer, so they don't have the rule. It's a part of conquering another nation is the mitzvah of Yifas Torah. It's a special heter that Jews are given while they're conquering the land. If their impulses are very strong and they have a terrible desire for Yifas Torah, and it's in a war which is sanctioned, which they're allowed to do, special mitzvah. But it's not because the Goyim have an Isser and we have a Heter. It's not a Heter, it's part of Kibush. What about less than Shavapruta? We have a rule that Goyim are not mochel less than Shavapruta. So if a guy steals from another guy a half a penny, he could be killed. That's Gezel. Whereas Jews, if it's not a Shavapruta, it doesn't count. Which is usher for them, and it's mutter for us, because they're not capable of being mochel. Interesting, the last Rashi on the page, the last line of the page, Jews were also commanded not to steal. It's not like they have an Isser and we're allowed to steal. Right? Less than a Shavapruta, we don't consider stealing. Because we are magnanimous. We say, oh, it's less than a penny. I'm mochel. They are people of mercy, and we forgive a small thing. But the Goyim, Bnei Noach, are cruel, and they're not mochel anything. So therefore, it's not that they have a rule of stealing and we don't. You're trying to show that for a Goy it's also for a Jew it's mutter. It's not the case at all. We both have a rule of Gezel, except what's Gezel to us is not Gezel. What's not Gezel is Gezel to them. It's not Gezel to us. It's like, just to go off. I remember back in the old days of the USSR, when it came to the Olympics and the American innocents came home and all the people from the Eastern Bloc, the judges, had ruled in favor of the Russians, and they said, they were like stunned, they won, the Americans really won, but the judges awarded it to the Russians, and they just, and one kid said, what's cheating to us is not cheating to them, and we find it now with the negotiations with Hamas and all that stuff. They could cheat. We know they're going to cheat. We know if they agree to something, then it doesn't mean anything. But we have to keep our word, right? What's cheating to us is not cheating to them. That's a mitzvah to them to cheat us. They don't look at it differently. So it says the Gemara at the bottom of the page. Okay. So now we're going to the question that Avram raised. Any mitzvah that was given to Enoch and was repeated at Har Sinai was given to both. Says the Gemara, what about circumcision? Circumcision was given to Avram, and it was repeated at Har Sinai. So it should apply to both. So both Goyim and Jews should have to keep mitzvah of Sinai. You have to keep my covenant, which is the bris milah. Venishim Pasinos repeated same says yimo, right? And there the Yisrael number of Enoch, even though it was repeated in the Torah. Says the Gemara, the mitzvah of milah wasn't really repeated at Har Sinai. Since it says b'yom hashmini, it's emphasizing that it's got to be on the 8th day, even if you're machal Shabbos to do the bris milah. It's a mitzvah to do it on Shabbos. B'yom hashmini was b'yom afilu b'Shabbos. So if it says Meshrei Shabbos, Udasa b'yom afilu b'Shabbos, right? It has to be during the day, even on Shabbos. On Shabbos also b'yom afilu b'Shabbos. So it's to tell you that's what, it wasn't really repeated to tell me, oh, there's a mitzvah now, you should keep Milah. The Milah was already from Bnei Noach, and therefore wasn't really repeated at Sinai. It was just repeated to tell me this particular aspect, this particular detail, that you keep it even on Shabbos. So therefore, Milah is considered a mitzvah that was not really repeated at Sinai. Now, didn't we just say before that there's only one mitzvah that wasn't repeated at Sinai, and that's only for the Jews, and this was repeated? So we say this isn't considered a repetition because it was only for this detail. Okay, what about Puruvu? For a period of revision, Emar Lebnei Noach says Vatam Puruvu B'Shir Tzabaretz, right? Venetius Basin is repeated. Lechem or Lem Shuv Lechem Lechem. This is Lechem or Lechem wet by our Sinai environment. It's repeated, right? That after the 3 days that they had to stay away from their wives by Matan Torah, afterwards they were told to go back and go live with your wives and have children. There also Yisrael Nam Lebnei Noach, even though it was repeated. So these seems to be another exception to the rule. It says no. That's teaching me a special halacha. Even though Hashem said, keep it only for 3 days, stay away from your wives for 3 days, afterwards, when he was matzah to go back, it's tell you that even if they was only also for a certain period of time, you still have to have a heter afterwards. Mishum milsa, name right? Huda. In other words, anything that was taken by a majority vote, so to speak. It was given, Hashem told us, Hashem gave us a rule, you have to stay away for 3 days. Even though the 3 days is up already, you still have to need a special heter to be matrit back. Anything that was counted, anything that was like a majority rule, you have to rescind that rule, you have to have you have to be matrit again specifically. Tosfos learns a little bit differently than Rashi, but Rashi says, even though it says only for 3 days, and after 3 days, it's automatically mutter, like the rule was only for 3 days. Still, you should be matrid after it. So again, it's not to tell me that Hashem gave us another rule. Hashem repeated our Sinai Puruvu. It's just to teach me that halacha, that since I prohibited Puruvu for 3 days, I'm matrid. When I come to matrid, I have to specifically give a heter, a permit to go back to their wives. If that's the case, so why do you say all the mitzvahs? You could always say any mitzvah that was given to Bnei Noach as repeated at Sinai applies to both. How can you say it applies to both? You could always say that every mitzvah that was given at Sinai was repeated for its particular details and not really to tell you the mitzvah again. Why did he have to give you the losas? If he just wanted to tell you a detail, so tell me the detail and tell me that, like, okay, just like here, you have to give a special heter after 3 days. How do you keep the mitzvah of Milah even on Shabbos? Give me the details. Why did he have to give me a specific isser and repeated in the Torah? That's to teach me that it was repeated. The isser itself, the prohibition was repeated at Sinai in all other cases. The only one that wasn't repeated at our Sinai and therefore only applies to Jews and not to Goyim, is Rav Shapiro, who said that the Geranasha really, the Isser was from the time of Bnei Yaakov. It wasn't like the other Shita that the Geranasha was only at our Sinai. It was just stuck in its place and tell us what's the reason for the mitzvah Geranasha because of what took place by Yaakov. No, Rav Shapiro actually was given at the time of Yaakov. So Haninami lo isne, right? So why don't you say also Haninami lo isne? So all the other mitzvahs, like you just said, Milah and Pruavu, were also not repeated. It was only repeated for their details, but it wasn't really repeated. So no, Hani isne l'shamil sabiyama, they were repeated for some reason, like for a detail. Halas nekal Geranasha wasn't repeated at all. Geranasha was not repeated at our Sinai at all. Pruavu and Milah were repeated, but not really repeated as an Isser or a mitzvah. It was only repeated for their detail. Boy saying more, I could tell you a simple question. To answer Avram's question that the Gemara asked here, why not Milah? Milah was also repeated. The answer is, but Milah was specifically only given to the children of Avraham Avinu. Hashem only gave the mitzvah of Milah to Avraham Avinu, even at the time when he gave the mitzvah. It wasn't like mitzvah Bnei Noach. Mitzvah Bnei Noach was said, listen, don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't do avodah zarah. That was given to everybody. But the mitzvah Milah was only to Avraham Avinu. Avraham was never given to other nations. Hashem only gave it, warned Avram to keep that mitzvah, because it says, "Va'atas brisi tishmor." You should keep my covenant. Atav zarecha chorecha. You and your children afterwards the dorosam. Atav zarecha ein in eshachrina. Only the children of Avram were given the mitzvah of Milah. Nobody else. Elamei atav b'nei Shmuel chayvos yishos mechayev the Arabs. Why the Arabs, some of them do keep Mila because they follow what Yishmael. The Muslim minhag was, or used to be, that they gave the bris Mila at what? At age 13, like Yishmael got it. But then they found out that the Arab kids started to run away from home at age 12 and a half when they found out what's going to happen to them. So now the ones who do it, they do it when the kids are babies. But anyway, but the point is that there's no mitzvah in Torah for the Bnei Yishmael. After Bnei Yishmael chayva, because it says by Avram Avinu, you and your seed afterwards. The answer is no. Ki b'yitzchak yikar chazara. Even though technically, of course, Bnei Yishmael came from Avram, but Hashem said only your children, your seed will only be Yitzchak. So Bnei Esav. What about Yitzchak? Yitzchak had two children, Yaakov and Esav. So why doesn't Esav also, the Bnei Esav should also be chayiv? L'chayvo, be Yitzchak will call Yitzchak. It's famous drasha because it says ki be Yitzchak. Part of Yitzchak will go after you, not Yishmael. Yitzchak as opposed to Yishmael, and not all of Yitzchak, only Bnei Yaakov, not Bnei Esav. Masprovoshi Elameata Bnei Ketura. Remember, Avram in his old age he had more children, right? He married two, and he had 6 sons from him. So they also should not be chayav because it says ki Yitzchak yikar the chazara, and not the Bnei Ketura. They should not be chayav in Mila. That's going on everybody. Rabbos is Bnei Ketura. In other words, as Rashi explains, all of Avram's children had to be circumcised, including Yitzchak, including Yishmael, including the Bnei Ketura. All of his sons had to be circumcised. But subsequently, if their children, only the children of Yitzchak, and only a Yaakov from Yitzchak, ki be Yitzchak, and not the children of the children of Keturah, the 6 sons that he had from Keturah, they themselves had a bris milah, but not their children, not the next generation. Amar Rishon was not allowed to eat meat. He was right because it says lachem yel achla. Right, talks about the Esav and the Pri and all the natural growing fruits and vegetables, everything that grew out of the ground, the grains. You can eat that. Right, you and the chayas haaretz can eat that. You and the animals can eat all that food, can all eat the vegetation, but you can't eat the animals. And when Bnei Enoch came, he told them that Bnei Enoch were allowed to eat meat. Just like the vegetables, the naturally growing vegetation, just like that. You can eat everything, including the meat. So maybe they shouldn't be also the Ibn Achai. Hashem told me you're allowed to eat meat, maybe even Ibn Achai. Right? But that's an excuse, right? That you can't eat basar b'nafsho, you can't eat the basar while the animal is still alive. You can't eat meat that was taken from a live animal. I might think that Isser should apply, even the Isser of Ibn Achai should even apply to shrutzim. Obviously, we're talking about shrutzim, which are later on, which became kosher, but shrutz, you can't eat basar machai. What about shrutz machai? It says Talmud ach. But means it's a limitation. Basar b'nafsho dam lo sochel. Right? Basar b'nafsho, you can't eat basar while it's live, but shrutzim, the rule of Ibn Achai does not apply to shrutzim. How do you see that how do you darshan that way? Damo misha damo chalik m'saro. This only applies to Avram Rachai only applies to an animal whose flesh is separate from its blood. Their blood and their flesh is intertwined. You can't separate the two. Therefore, the rule of Avram Rachai does not apply to shrotzim. Meisvei, you say over here that Adam Rishon was not allowed to eat meat. He had to be a vegetarian. That was the rule. And you should rule over the fish. Well, doesn't that mean that he was allowed to eat fish? So that means it wasn't just vegetation; he could eat fish too. My love means this: that you should rule over them. That you weren't allowed to eat them, but you're allowed to rule over them. You could use them as your servants, right? Meaning work with them. Now, how can fish do work? Can fish do work? Ain. The boy Rachva, we know you're not allowed to work with 2 animals together, right? What's the pasuk, Michael? Right, pasuk. You shouldn't work with 2 different animals. Doesn't mean daf geshor chamor, means 2 different animals. So yes, this question. What about, can you work with a goat and shibut? The shibut is a large fish, mine. So what do you see over here? that you could do work with a fish. He asked the question, how can you work with a fish? If you had gigantic fish, or let's say you tie up, I don't know, today you could imagine, let's say you tie up a dolphin, right? And you have a dolphin in the water, and you have another animal right over on the bank, and you tie them together. Can you work with them? So you see that they could do work. Okay. Tashma. Okay. So fish, as I understand, it says uva ofa shemayim redu bigasayom uva ofa shemayim. You should rule over the fish and the oaf and birds. Well, it doesn't mean that you will rule over them. You can eat the birds, meaning you can eat meat. And you just said that Amarishan was not to meat. This law lemach also means for work. Can birds do work? Ain't. Can a boy rabba bar rafuni? Yes, it's kasha. Yes. Another pasuk says, not only can you not have klayim, right? Lo savad b'shor v'chamar yachdav, but it says lo sachsam shor b'disho. When your animal is threshing for you, don't muzzle him, right? You have to allow it's sar balachayim. He's threshing the food. He's not allowed to eat it. So he says lo sachsam. What about if you thresh with a geese or chickens? Let's say the Rabbi Yosef holds like this: that when are you not allowed to muzzle the animal if he's working with his hands and his feet, working totally with his hands and his feet. Let's say geese or tarnagom that don't have hands; they only have feet. So what would you say there? Rabbi Yosef says you have to work with both. What are you there? Is that enough because they don't have hands and they're doing everything they can, or you say they have no hands? So he says if you threshed with geese and with chickens, what's the rule? But the fact is, you could thresh with them, so you could use birds for work. So again, when Adam Rishon was prohibited to eat meat, it was all kinds of meat, including fish, including birds. You say over here, you rule over them. Rule over them means they can work for you. Tashma b'chol chaya haromeses ala aretz, right? And any animal that's creeping on the ground. Well, an animal that creeps on the ground, you can't expect that to work. That must mean eating. So again, you could see you could eat meat. You don't have to be a vegetarian. That's coming to include a snake. Woe unto the great servant who's lost from the world. If the nachash was not cursed. See, originally the snake had feet. The snake walked around like those great serpents that they tell you, lived in the old days, right? The giant animals that were now extinct, that they find their whatever they find their remains now. The giant,
just like an alligator or a crocodile.
Yeah, well, something like that. But they were much bigger. What do we call those things? Dinosaurs, right? Dinosaurs. So the snake was also like once a dinosaur, but then he was cursed, so he was taking away his feet. So now he just slithers on the ground. But if it wouldn't be that he was cursed, right? Everybody would have taken one of these great snakes or serpents. Everybody would grab two of these great animals, token to one. And he would send one to the north, and one to the south. To bring him sandal vonim token, bring very nice precious stones, good stones, good margolios and pearls. In other words, he would have hired, everybody would have used these animals for their work. So again, nachash does not mean, it says, does not mean to say you could eat this animal. It meant to say that you could work for you. So we showed that birds can thresh for you, a fish can also work for you, and nachash could also work for you, except now can't do very much work. All he could do is slither on the ground and scare people. And below, not only would they send these great snakes to bring them precious stones from around the world, they would also tie a big strap, whatever, to the tail of the snake, and also use it to gather dirt. So he would use the tail of the animal to bring him dirt for his garden and to build his ruin. Meisvei. So in all the cases, we've proven that Adam Rishon was still not allowed to eat any sort of meat, fish, creeping things, birds, etc. How can you say that he didn't eat meat? Adam Rishon used to sit and lay down in Gan Eden. And the Malach Yesharis would roast for him meat, right? And they would strain for him wine. Nachash took a look at him, gazed at him, and saw how he was on a boat and got jealous. He got jealous of Adam Rishon. That's why he started to entice him. says Hasam Basar Yad Mishraim. That wasn't regular meat that was on the ground from animals or fish or creeping things, but rather was special meat that was sent down from heaven, like the manna, like man. So the Marmika Basar Yad Mishraim was when a basar comes down from the heaven. Where do you find basar? Ain. Rav Shimon Chalafta. The story was Rav Shimon Chalafta. He was going on the road. He met some lions that were roaring, that were roaring to his face. Amar, he quoted this pasuk, Akfirim Shogim Lataref, Umvakish Me'el Ochlam. And the lions roar after their prey, and they seek their food from heaven, from Hashem. So when he quoted that pasuk, Rav Shimon Chalafta was like a miracle worker, and when he said those words, so two sides of beef or two thighs, lumps of meat came down from heaven at that point. One was eaten by the lions, and they left the other one, so to speak, for Rav Shimon Chalafta. I say he brought the meat. I say also came to Beis Medrash, Boila, and he asked this question, Boila Davar Tameu. Is it Davar Tameh? It wasn't slaughtered properly. Is that Davar Tar, or is it Tar? It's a piece of meat that I didn't say. Ask that question today. They have this
the phony meat,
right? The synthetic meat. They say it tastes fantastic, but it's not meat, right? But the question is, I think it's actually made from meat cells, and therefore you have this question, right? So boy, Davar Tameh, you say Davar Tar. Amalei, they told me Spanish. Ain't Davar Tameh Yad Mishmaim. Interesting. Rav Shimon Chalafta was a miracle worker. He quotes a pasuk, and the lions seek their meat from heaven, and the heaven comes down. But he didn't know this halacha. That he had to ask in the Beis Medrash. Is it kosher or not? Oh, Davar Tameh. So he said, "That's the thing. It's Davar Tameh and Yerushalayim." What happens if it came down from heaven a meat that looked like it came from a donkey? Donkey meat rained down from heaven. What do you say there? Amalei, Yared Nala. They told him like you foolish. Rashi says Yared Nala. Tanakh like you foolish serpent, you foolish bird. Well, like we said, ain't Davar Tameh Shemaim. Whatever came down from heaven is kosher. I don't care what it looks like. That's what they told him. So the point is though that if Adam Rishon ate meat, it wasn't meat like we know it. It wasn't from an animal, from a live animal. It was rained down from heaven.
How did Hevel know to slaughter an animal?
Yeah. Well, we saw when Cain killed Hevel, he didn't know. Well, Hevel brought Peros. He brought Peros.
Hevel brought Becca.
No,
Cain
brought Hevel. Hey, Vigam who meets son. Yeah, he brought an animal. So again, how did he know? How did he know? Well, first of all, he made out it. Yeah. No, how did he know how did he know not to eat? In other words, when he wasn't allowed to eat the meat.
So how do you know he killed it?
Yeah, so how did he kill it in some way? Maybe like the way Cain killed Hevel by probing many times. So it doesn't say that he shechted it kalacha. No. When Cain killed Hevel, we had how did Cain kill Hevel? He didn't know how to kill him, right? Yeah. So he kept piercing him until he came to. So maybe Hevel, when he brought the karbonos, also he figured out. He kept doing it until he killed the animal. He brought him in, right?
Why would he even thought of it if they weren't allowed to eat the animal?
They weren't allowed to eat it, but they were allowed to offer that, to work with it, bring it as an offering. Yeah. So he said, Shimon said, not only the Zayin Mitzvah Menoch, so we added on Nun Vav and Beis, the top there we added on. We said on Nun Vav and Aleph, we brought down the 7 Mitzvahs Menoch in the last line of Nun Vav and Aleph, and on the Beis we added on even Dam and Achai, we've explained today. Reb Chit Gomer Sirus, right? Also intermingling different species. Reb Shimon Omer Afal Kishuf, even for sorcery. My time. Where do you get this idea that Kishuf was also forbidden? Zayin Mitzvah Noach. My time. Reb Shimon. The pasuk says at the top of Daf Samach, Machashei Felos Chaya. Do not allow a woman, a sorceress, to live. You have to kill her. Except right afterwards, it says it's called Shochev and Beim Mosimas. Whoever sleeps with an animal will die. That's considered an adultery, which implies the goyim also. Koshesh mechal kol shochev, whoever's included in that. And maybe yeshem mechal mechrev shelos chai. So therefore, mechashev was also from the Zayin Mitzvahs Bnei Noach. So again, it was repeated at Sinai, obviously mechashev shelos chaya. But as we said, anything that was given to the Bnei Noach and was repeated at Sinai applies to both. So even though we don't find that it says machashef, it doesn't say that by Bnei Noach, it doesn't say specifically, but it must have been a mitzvah that was given to them. Reb Lezer Omer Afal Aklayim, even for intermingling species, right? Intermingling species. But how did we get this from? Amr Shmuel, how do we Amr Kra? How do we know that the goyim were also prohibited from climb? Because the pasuk says, Amr Kra, Eschuko sai tishmoru. My ordinances you shall keep. The ones I told you before. In other words, my ordinances that I gave you once before, it doesn't say Tishmru es chukosai that I'm going to give you now, but since it says chukosai first, it's chukosai, the ones that I gave you before, meaning when I gave you the Bnei Noach, you should keep them now also. So that tells you, and what does it say afterwards? Pasuk as chukosai, the same pasuk as chukosai tishmaru. What it says, don't commingle different species of animals. The climb, and also don't plant climb in your field. This refers to what is just like with mixing species. Meaning grafting trees together. The issur of goyim is not to mix seeds. They don't have an issur of mixing seeds together. They have an issur of grafting trees together. Just like your animal is also, it's not davar toli ba'aretz, and therefore it applies in chutz la'aretz. Grafting trees is also in chutz la'aretz as well. And therefore, the point is, how does he know that climb is also gone? Because it says chukosai, the laws that I gave you before Matan Torah, apply now too. It says this by many mitzvahs. Keep my ordinances and my laws. Are you going to say that all these laws apply? Many mitzvahs. That if you're saying chukosai means the ones that I gave you before, many mitzvahs are that way. So you're going to say they apply to goyim also, because you're going to put that into the rule of mitzvahs that were given to Bnei Noach and at our Sinai, and therefore it applies to both. So no, we also there chukim shechar far no. Hasam ushmartem es chukosai the hashta. There it says shmartem es chukosai, guard my laws that I'm giving you now. Hachas chukosai tishmaru, the laws that I gave you before. Chukim shigim become mikar. In other words, when the word chukosai is there first, it's mashma laws that I gave you once before. And even though Rashi brings down a pasuk which says ushmartem es mususai ves chukosai, but it first says ushmartem. Rashi says, right? Mitzvahs, mitzvah shmir. Hasim keeping the ratio since the beginning pasuk says mishpatai tasu. Then uchel as chukosai tishmaru. But in the pasuk of Klayim, it starts off as chukosai tishmaru, telling me the laws that I gave you once before. Back to the Mishnah now. We said in the Mishnah that if you curse Hashem, you're chayiv misa, chayiv skila. Shuman Karcha says, how did they do it? Every day they did it with a kinu. You know, it's while the court was deliberating this mitzvah, Adam came and say that this guy cursed God. How do they say? What did he say? You have to use a kinu. You have to use a substitute name and say Yaka Yosi es Yosi. I'm Shuman Karcha. Amar Bacha Bar Yaakov. You have to say Hashem's name. In other words, if you say Ka Yud and then Hey, that's not the curse. The curse has to be with 4 letters, either Adnus, Aleph Dalet Nun Yun, or Yud Kei Vav Kei. Lapuka Ben Sheyosios, the low. Pshita. How do we? If isn't it obvious? What is Mishur Rabbi Yaakov saying when Mishur Bekocha says Yaka Yosios Yosi? It's got to be with 4 letters. Isn't that obvious? Pshita Yaka Yosi es Yosi time. It says Yaka Yosi. Yosi is 4 letters, so we assume he's referring to the 4 letters of Yud Kei Vav Kei or the Shem Adnus. It's not the same. We'll say Yamada. Can we just use an example? Maybe it means even the 2 letters. Any name of Hashem, Shakai, any name of Hashem would also be included. It doesn't have to be the 4-letter word. He just gave an example. That's just an example. Yaka Yosi es Yosi Kamash Mulan, that we don't say that, but then it's got to be 4 letters. You can understand some It's not only the famous Shem Mufurish of 42 letters there, but even a 4-letter word of Hashem is also Shem. Chita Yaka Yosi es Yosi Tanan. The amount of same Adika Shem Rabba. I might think you the only chayav for Gita for blasphemy if you curse Hashem with the 42-letter name. If you use the same name. When we'll just give an example. Yakas as an example. You have to say that you're cursing Hashem's name with Hashem's name. So he tells you Yakas, but maybe it really has to be 42 letters. Kamashma, we don't say that. But even the 4-letter Shem of Hashem, you're also chayav for when it comes to blasphemy. So either way, whether you learn it not that it's come to teach you not the 2-letter one, or whether it's not the 42-letter one, it's got to be at least 4 letters. Obviously, if it's the 42-letter one, you're also chayiv. It means to say it's got to be at least 4 letters. All right, tomorrow's daf is daf samach. We'll pick it up on the podcast from there, and on Sunday, Meretz Hashem, we'll start on daf samach aleph, the second line, maskefla. The end of the second line on daf samach aleph on Sunday, Meretz Hashem. Shabbat shalom l'kulam.
Shabbat shalom, beautiful. Thank you.